My name is Elias Ward, and as of this morning, the morning this story begins, I have worked exactly 6 years, 4 months, and 9 days as the caretaker of Ridgeview Memorial Cemetery, a 40-acre stretch of rolling ground tucked behind a patch of hardwood forest in northern Arkansas. I introduce myself formally because that's how my employment records list me, and because if anything happens to me today, I want whoever reads this to know precisely who wrote every word. 61 words, including my name, form this opening declaration. I counted them twice. Accuracy matters here. It always has. The cemetery is old enough that nobody alive can remember its original boundaries. Graves sink and tilt, the ground shifts, and the forest seems to creep a little closer every year even though we cut it back every spring. Still, it's quiet work. Or at least it's supposed to be. The reality is that Ridgeview runs on a set of rules. Rules I didn't write but have followed every single day because breaking them, even once, has consequences I've seen with my own eyes. Today was supposed to be ordinary. Sunrise check-ins, equipment inspection, clearing debris after last night's storm. But the entire day slipped off course the moment my radio clicked on at 6:14 a.m. and I heard something breathing on the line. Not static, not wind, breathing, deep, slow, wet. The signal wasn't from any ranger or grounds worker. I was alone on shift, and the radio was still lying on the charger. That should have been the first sign that the rules would matter more today than ever. Rule 1. Do not respond to voices on the radio unless you can see the person speaking. If you cannot see them, they are not alive. I didn't answer, didn't even touch the radio. I slid on my boots, grabbed my clipboard, and stepped outside into the crisp air. A low fog hovered waist-high across the cemetery like a pale tide rolling between the graves. The storm must have brought it in, but something about its movement felt deliberate, like it parted slightly when I stepped off the porch and then closed behind me. By 6:30 a.m., the sun was climbing, but the fog didn't burn off. Instead, it thickened, swallowing the service road in both directions. I tried to ignore the feeling settling in my chest. A subtle pressure, the kind you get when you realize you've walked into the wrong room without meaning to. I did my rounds. East Lot first, then the slope near Section B, where the oldest stones lean like they're eavesdropping on each other. Birds usually chatter in the forest at that hour, especially after rain, but today there was nothing. Not a rustle, not a wing beat. Rule 2. If the grounds fall silent, stop moving. Something is passing through. I stopped. The fog stilled. No breeze, no sound. Just a long minute of waiting with my breath locked behind my teeth. Then the normal sounds trickled back. A distant crow, the crack of a branch from the woods. Whatever had passed wasn't visible, but I felt it. An absence brushing right through me. A cold seam drawn across the base of my spine. By 7:20 a.m., I made it to the maintenance shed. The storm had blown a section of fencing down near the north border, so I pulled the small utility truck around to gather tools and a sledgehammer. As I opened the shed door, something slid across the concrete inside. Not a scamper, not a scurry, a slow glide. I flicked on the light. Nothing moved. Nothing looked disturbed. But I've learned better than to dismiss that kind of sound. Ridgeview has layers like old wallpaper, and sometimes one layer shifts enough for something in the next one to bleed through. Rule 3. Never investigate movement inside dark structures until the lights are fully on. The lights held steady, so I stepped inside, collected what I needed, and backed out without turning my back on the interior. Experience teaches you habits here, tiny ones but important. By 8:05 a.m., I reached the north fence line. The fog was thicker there, kneeling over the grass like a living thing. The fence section hadn't just fallen. It looked bent inward, as if something had pressed hard against it from the forest side. Tracks led up to it. Not boot prints. Not animal tracks either. The ground had a perfect oval depression, smooth on the edges, about the size of a kitchen sink. Nothing natural leaves that shape. Nothing I know anyway. I should have reported it immediately, but reporting would mean talking on the radio, and Rule 1 held firm in the front of my mind. So I raised my phone instead. But the screen refused to respond. Black, dead, no flicker, no boot logo, just nothing. That's when I realized something else. The air tasted wrong, like the after-smell of struck matches, but faint, metallic, sharp enough to sting the back of my tongue. Rule 4. If the air tastes metallic, leave the area. Do not run. Do not look behind you. I obeyed. I walked back toward the truck with deliberate, steady steps. My pulse thudded in my ears. The fog coiled at my ankles like it wanted to tangle there. But I kept going. No rush. No panic. That's how you survive here. I made it 5 steps before I heard something breathe behind me. Not close. Not far. But following. It matched my pace exactly. Exhale for exhale, the faintest rumble beneath it. Something heavy. Something with lungs larger than any Arkansas wildlife I've ever encountered. I didn't look back. I reached the truck door, slid inside, and shut it quietly. The breathing stopped instantly, like the act of closing the door cut whatever thread connected it to me. But the moment the latch snapped shut, a voice whispered from the passenger seat. "You forgot Rule 5. I didn't move. Slowly, so slowly, I turned my head. The seat was empty. The fog outside pressed against the windshield like a crowd of hands. And I realized something that chilled me clean through. There is no Rule 5. Not in any list I was given. Not in any version the last caretaker left behind. Yet something inside the cemetery believed there was, and it knew I had forgotten it. The empty passenger seat shouldn't have terrified me as much as it did, but the voice, calm, close, confident, felt like someone had leaned in with their mouth just inches from my ear. I stayed still for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel even though the truck wasn't running. My breath fogged the glass lightly, but the fog outside stayed motionless, layered thick across the cemetery lawn. I could feel something waiting past it, listening for any sound I made. I checked the mirrors. Nothing in the side view. Nothing moving behind me. The fog made the world look like a blank page someone forgot to write on. I forced myself to inhale slowly, focusing on the familiar smell of the truck. Oil, dust, old vinyl. Something real. Something I could trust. The keys were still in my pocket. When I pulled them out, the jingle seemed far too loud. I froze again, waiting. Fog doesn't react to sound. I knew that logically, but Ridgeview isn't always governed by logic. When nothing happened, not a shift, not a breath, I slid the key into the ignition and turned it just far enough to power the dashboard. The radio flared to life, not with static, with a voice. My voice. "You forgot Rule 5. I shut the radio off so fast the plastic dial clicked painfully under my fingers. But the words still rang in my head, like the echo of something spoken inside a large metal chamber. Hearing your own voice say something you never said does something strange to you. It makes you feel like the world isn't anchored the same way it was a minute before. I swallowed hard, started the engine fully, and kept my eyes forward. Rule 1 forbids responding to voices unless I can see the speaker. And there was no speaker, just that smothering fog. I eased the truck into reverse and backed away from the fence line. The headlights carved only a few yards of visibility, and even then, the beams looked absorbed rather than reflected, like the fog was swallowing light. When I turned onto the service path, the truck's tires passed over something softer than earth, more like pushing through a shallow drift of leaves. Except this morning, there were no leaves, only grass, only fog. By 8:40 a.m., I reached the intersection near the maintenance shed. Normally, I'd park there, file a report, and start cleanup procedures. But nothing about this morning felt routine, and another part of me, the part that had kept me alive this long, told me to check the central grounds first. The storm could have unearthed something, or someone. The fog thinned as I approached the central section, peeling back in long, curling ribbons as if something large had passed through shortly before. The graves near the center are newer, flat markers, evenly spaced rows, nothing like the older side where stones lean half-swallowed by earth. Usually the area looks clean, almost manicured. Today, every marker was turned. Not tilted, turned. Each one rotated 90 degrees, all facing east. Dozens of granite slabs, some weighing more than half a ton each, realigned in the same exact direction. No tire tracks, No drag marks. No footprints except my own. Rule 6. Unwritten but repeated by every caretaker before me. Rose in my mind. If the graves shift position, do not touch them. They will return to their rightful place if left alone. I didn't need convincing. I stayed on the gravel edging, careful not to disturb a single blade of grass. My phone buzzed suddenly, but my phone had been dead earlier. Fully dead. Black screen, no response. Yet now it vibrated with a short, sharp urgency, like someone had tapped the back of it with a fingernail. I pulled it out slowly. No notifications. No messages. The screen glowed faintly. No apps. No icons. Just a bright white background. For a split second, a shadow crossed the screen. Not an object. A silhouette. Tall. Narrow. Shoulders too high. Arms too long. Then the screen blinked out to black again. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. I tried to restart it, but it stayed dead. I shoved it back into my pocket and stepped away from the central rows, keeping the truck in sight. The air around me felt heavier now, like humidity before a summer storm. Except this heaviness didn't rest on my skin. It pressed deeper, settling into my ribs. I reached the old fountain next, a stone basin in the middle of a circular path. It hasn't worked in decades, but today, water rippled across its surface. Slow concentric circles pulsed outward even though nothing had disturbed it. The circles grew smaller, tighter, until the water stilled. Then the reflection changed. The sky above me was gray, fogged over, but in the water, the reflection showed a clear, bright blue sky. No fog, no clouds, and directly behind me, visible only in that false reflection, stood a figure. I didn't turn around. Rule 7. Never look directly at anything you first see in reflection. Leave the area without acknowledging it. I stepped backward twice, never breaking eye contact with the basin's edge instead of the reflection. The figure didn't move in the water, but its shadow lengthened, stretching across the rippling surface like it was reaching toward me. I forced myself not to run. Running draws attention. Running says you know something is wrong. When I reached the truck, the engine was still idling, but the fog had gathered tightly around it, as if drawn by the heat. I opened the door slowly, slid inside, and shut it gently. Something tapped the roof light, then twice more, a steady pattern. Tap, 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 tap. A pattern I recognized. Rule 8. When something taps in threes, it is asking a question. Do not answer. The tapping stopped the moment I placed both hands on the wheel. The windshield fogged from the outside this time, and words appeared in the condensation, traced by a fingertip I could not see. Where is Rule 5? I stared at the message until the letters began to melt into drips. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my jaw. I wiped the windshield with my sleeve, but the fog slid away before I touched it, as if something had retreated the moment I made contact. There was no Rule 5, not on my paper list. Not on the version the previous caretaker handed me. Not on the version before him. I'd memorized them, counted them, repeated them every morning. Yet something in Ridgeview insisted one existed. Something that expected me to follow it. Something that was now searching for it. I backed the truck onto the access path again, not sure where to go next. Then my radio clicked on by itself. A child's voice whispered through the static. Elias, you broke it. The fog shifted beside the truck, rising a foot higher, like something inside it had turned toward the sound. You broke Rule 5. I turned the radio off, but the child's breath lingered in the cab, and I realized something colder than anything I'd felt all morning. Whatever Rule 5 was, Ridgeview believed it existed, and if it believed that, it might decide I'd already broken it. I kept driving because stopping felt like an invitation, an acknowledgement that something had cornered me. The cemetery roads curve like veins through the grounds, looping around mausoleums, family plots, and shaded groves that look peaceful in daylight but carry a different weight in fog. Even inside the truck, with the doors locked and the engine humming, the pressure in the air felt wrong. It wasn't fear exactly, more like expectation. Something was waiting for me to act. By 9:15 a.m., I'd circled the western side twice, hoping the fog would thin or sunlight would break through, but neither happened. It was as if the storm clouds refused to move, pinning the strange half-light over Ridgeview. I slowed near Section D, a secluded stretch near the woods where a row of marble statues stands in a crescent. Angels, mostly, hands folded or arms extended. They're too heavy to shift, too tall to climb, too solid to disturb. Except now every angel was facing the woods, not the graves they were meant to guard. I parked 20 yards away and stayed inside the truck. The statues didn't move while I watched them, but their shadows cast long on the fog, stretched like black stains across a white surface. I forced my eyes to stay on the ground. Rule 9. Do not make eye contact with anything that appears human but is not. Statues don't count as human, but what stands behind them sometimes does. The treeline rustled once, just a whisper of motion. The fog there seemed to fold inward, like someone stepped through it. I tightened my grip on the wheel and waited. The air tasted metallic again, faint, but present. I backed the truck up slowly, keeping the statues in view without looking directly at their faces. The radio clicked again, a soft, rhythmic static. Not a voice, not words, breathing, slow, rattling as if someone struggled for air. The kind of breath you hear from someone lying on their back with broken ribs. I grabbed the radio and switched it off, but the sound continued for a second after, muffled, as though coming from somewhere inside the truck itself. Then it stopped. The cemetery regained its unnatural stillness. Even the leaves on the nearby oak trees remained motionless, held in suspension like the air was thick enough to grip them. I couldn't keep circling blindly. I needed clarity, elevation, perspective. The old Caretaker Tower, an outdated wooden structure built decades ago, was on the ridge overlooking the southern field. We rarely use it now, but from up there, you can see almost the entire cemetery when the weather cooperates. I drove there next. As the truck climbed the incline, the fog thinned around the higher ground, slipping away like it didn't want to climb. That should have relieved me, but instead, I felt exposed, as if the fog had been hiding whatever else was watching me from the lower sections. The tower appeared through the haze, looming like a bleached spine against the gray sky. Its wooden steps looked slick with moisture, and something about the structure seemed slightly off balance, like it leaned more than usual. The storm might have warped it. I parked at the base and stepped out. The air felt clearer here, cooler, quieter, but the quiet wasn't natural, more like holding your breath underwater. I took the first step slowly, testing my weight. The wood groaned but held. Halfway up, the smell hit me. Not metallic this time. Sweet, like rotting flowers left too long in a vase. The kind that smells worse the longer you breathe it. Rule 3 covers dark structures, but the tower wasn't dark. The hatch at the top was open, spilling a soft gray light outward. Still, I paused before reaching the platform. The scent strengthened with every step, curling down from the hatch like an invisible rope drawing me upward. When I reached the top, I placed my hand on the edge of the hatch and listened. No breathing, no footsteps, but something shifted inside, soft, slow, like fabric dragged across wood. I braced myself and pulled up into the tower. Empty, not a single object out of place. The chair was where it always sat, the old desk with carved initials, the broken monitor from when we used to track weather patterns. Everything untouched, except the floor. A message was scratched into the wood, fresh enough that dust curled at the edges. FINDRULEFIVE. The letters weren't carved deep, more like traced quickly, as if someone had written them moments before I climbed up. My skin prickled with the certainty that the message hadn't existed 30 seconds ago. I crouched and touched the edge of the first letter. The wood was warm. A faint vibration trembled under my fingers. Like a heartbeat, I jerked my hand back and stood. The fog below shifted once, as if something massive moved beneath its surface. I stepped toward the window, careful not to cast my shadow too far over the ridge. A figure stood below, not in the fog, in the open clearing, plain as day, tall, unmoving, facing the tower. I froze, keeping my breathing shallow. It wasn't human. Its proportions were wrong, too elongated, limbs too thin, torso too narrow, but it stood upright like a man. No face, no clothing, just a silhouette darker than the surroundings, as if it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. It raised one arm slowly, not waving, pointing, directly at me. I stepped back from the window but didn't turn away fully. The figure didn't move. It kept pointing upward, toward the tower, toward me, or toward the message carved behind me. I didn't know which, and I didn't want to find out. Then the radio on my belt switched on again. This time, the voice wasn't a whisper. It was a scream, not of fear, of rage. "You were told." I staggered back, nearly hitting the desk. The scream cut off abruptly, replaced by the child's voice again. Soft, breathy, trembling. Please remember it. Before it shows you. Before what shows me. Before what?" The figure below lowered its arm. Not quickly, deliberately, like it had finished signaling. I backed toward the hatch. Whatever Rule 5 was, it wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding. Something expected me to know it. Something furious that I didn't. When my boot touched the top stair, the entire tower trembled. Not from wind. From something striking the supports below in one heavy blow. Then another. Then a third. The tapping pattern. But this time it wasn't asking a question. It was knocking to be let in. The tower shuddered again. Harder this time. A deep vibration that rattled through the wooden beams like the whole structure was being tested for weak points. I dropped into a crouch instinctively, one hand gripping the rail, the other braced on the floor. Dust sifted down from the rafters in thin streams. Something massive stood beneath the tower, something that wanted me to know it was strong enough to bring the place down if it chose to. The third knock wasn't a knock at all. It was a blow, a deliberate, punishing strike that made the planks under my boots flex. Rule 8 said tapping in threes meant a question. But this wasn't tapping. This wasn't gentle. And whatever was outside wasn't asking anymore. It was telling. I backed toward the hatch, swallowing down the urge to move too fast. Running draws attention. Running says you're prey. I lowered myself through the opening, both boots finding the top step. The moment I shifted my weight downward, the tower gave another groan. This one from above me. Something moved on the roof. Something heavy. The boards bowed with each slow step it took, dust drifting down like dull gray snow. I froze mid-step, not daring to inhale. The thing above me crept along the roofline with deliberate weight, pacing from one corner to the next, like it was circling a cage and measuring for escape. Except I was the one trapped. One board near the hatch bent inward, the wood splitting slightly under the pressure of a footstep that wasn't shaped like any foot I knew. Long, oval, too narrow at the heel. The tower wasn't built for that weight. A single decisive step would drive the thing straight through the ceiling and onto my back. I backed down the steps slowly, each creak feeling like it echoed too loudly in the morning's unnatural stillness. Halfway down, the air changed. The metallic taste flooded back, stinging my tongue. My heartbeat spiked automatically. Rule 4. I reached the ground level and stepped away from the base, careful not to break into a run even though every instinct screamed to sprint across the clearing. The fog at this higher elevation had thinned but not disappeared. Instead, it clustered low to the earth in strips, like veins of smoke lying perfectly still. Then the tower above me let out a sound like a snapped bone. Another board cracked. Whatever had been on the roof was descending the outside now. Slow, measured slides, like a body shifting its weight down wooden beams with inhuman patience. I never heard claws, never heard scraping, just that steady redistribution of mass. Something climbing, repositioning, hunting without urgency. The truck was 30 paces away. That might as well have been a mile. I moved toward it with deliberate calm, counting each breath, each step. The key fob was in my pocket, but clicking it would make noise. Noise that might bring whatever was behind me closer. So I kept walking, one step, then another. Something exhaled behind me, close enough that the hairs along my neck lifted. I didn't turn around. Turning around at Ridgeview is an invitation. A doorway you open with your eyes. Rule 9 whispered through my skull. Do not look. I reached the truck, slid a hand along the door to muffle the sound of the latch, and pulled it open as quietly as possible. When I eased myself inside, I kept my body angled forward, still refusing to turn even a fraction. Just as I pulled the door shut, a shadow swept across the driver's side window. Not the shape of a person. Something broader, taller. The fog around the tower rippled as if the air itself recoiled from whatever had stepped into view. I locked the doors. The soft click echoed too sharply inside the cab. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, 3 taps on the roof. Light, slow, perfectly spaced. Tap, tap, tap. The question again. Except I knew this wasn't the same tapping pattern from earlier. Not the gentle, curious knocking that hinted at boundaries and rules. This was mocking, taunting, a rhythm repeated because the thing above me wanted me to acknowledge it. Wanted me to break Rule 8 and answer. Another tap, a softer one, closer to the driver's door, just inches above my head. A child's voice whispered from inside the radio compartment. You need Rule 5 to leave. The radio wasn't even powered. I shook my head instinctively, not answering, just trying to disconnect from the voice. But even that movement felt dangerous. The fog pressed against the glass, thickening until the outside world dissolved entirely. When the tapping stopped, the silence that followed felt worse. Heavy, listening, waiting. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, louder than I wanted. For a heartbeat, I expected something to slam onto the hood or press its face against the window. But nothing happened. The pressure in the air eased slightly, as if whatever had been on the roof shifted its attention elsewhere. I started down the service road. The truck lurched. Not from the engine, something had stepped in front of it. The outline appeared through the fog first. Tall, motionless, the same silhouette I'd seen earlier but closer now. Too close. Its limbs hung too long to be human, and its head tilted with a slow, unnatural angle that made my stomach tighten. I pressed the brake and the truck jerked to a halt. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, blocking the road, the fog swirling around its lower half like a living shroud. The air around it shimmered slightly, as if heat rose from the ground despite the cold morning. Then it raised its hand again, not pointing this time, showing me something, a slip of paper pinched between 2 impossibly long fingers. White, crisp, clean. I knew instantly what it was even before the wind, an unnatural draft. Carried it under the truck's headlights. A rules sheet, my rules sheet, the exact one the previous caretaker had given me on my first day. Except this version had 10 rules, and Rule 5 wasn't blank. It was written in clean block letters. Rule 5. Do not acknowledge any new rule you did not receive on your first day. My blood ran cold, because the message carved in the tower, the words on the windshield, the voices from the fog, they had all been trying to force me to acknowledge it, to believe in it, to make it real. The figure lowered its hand slowly, letting the paper fall. It drifted to the ground, landing softly on the gravel. When it did, the fog around the figure peeled back, revealing the space where a face should have been. Empty, smooth, and unmistakably focused on me. I put the truck in reverse. The figure stepped forward. One long stride, then another, closing the distance with slow, inevitable purpose. There was no mistaking it now. The cemetery wasn't asking me to follow Rule 5. It was punishing me for refusing to. I shifted into reverse without checking the mirrors. Checking would mean looking at it too long, giving it too much presence. The truck rolled backward, gravel cracking under the tires. The figure advanced with those long, deliberate strides, each step too fluid, too controlled. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. Ridgeview bends itself around things like that. It didn't care about the vehicle between us. When I cleared 10 yards, I swung the wheel hard left and felt the back tires skid slightly before the truck regained traction. The figure paused, head tilting in that slow, wrong arc, as if it were studying the angle I'd chosen. Assessing, predicting. I floored the accelerator. Fog swallowed everything. The headlights pushed no more than 5 feet ahead, the beams strangled by the heavy gray mass. The road under me twisted in long, familiar curves, but today felt unfamiliar, as if the cemetery decided the map had changed. I kept the wheel steady anyway. This place will pull you into places that don't exist if you second-guess your path. Rule 10. 1. The departing caretaker told me verbally, not written anywhere, drummed in my thoughts. If you cannot see the way forward, trust your last known direction. Stopping is more dangerous than moving blind. So I kept moving. The radio clicked again. Not a voice this time, breathing, but not the ragged, broken breaths from earlier. This one was slow, rhythmic, steady, like someone sitting calmly in the back seat. I didn't look. I kept my eyes locked on the fog-blurred strip of road. The breathing grew closer, a soft shift of weight behind me, springs creaking under pressure. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The truck swayed slightly, the tires pulling to the right. I corrected it, heart beating in a rhythm no rule could stabilize. The fog thinned for the briefest moment, revealing a familiar shape ahead. The main maintenance building. Relief hit so hard I nearly choked on it. Just make it to the building. Inside there were lights, walls, doors. But the second I thought that, the breathing behind me stopped. Silence. A long one. Something leaned forward, its weight changing the balance of the truck, with an intimacy that felt like cold fingers pressed gently against the back of my neck. I shut my eyes for a single heartbeat, fighting the urge to slam the brakes or bolt from the truck. Rule 9. Do not turn. Do not look. I kept driving. When I reached the maintenance lot, the fog parted a little, like curtains drawn to reveal a stage. The building lights flickered weakly. They were on generator power, which meant the power lines were still down from the storm. The generator must have kicked in sometime earlier. I braked to a stop. The truck rocked gently, as if someone in the back seat shifted their weight again. I didn't open the door immediately. Something in the air felt wrong, like stepping out would place me somewhere I didn't recognize, even though I knew this building like the lines of my palm. The radio crackled. A child's voice whispered, "Don't leave yet." I swallowed and kept my hand on the ignition. The voice continued, softer, almost frightened. "It's not finished looking." I didn't want to know what it referred to. My eyes drifted toward the rearview mirror. Not directly, not fully, just enough to catch the faintest suggestion of movement in the dark behind me. A shape sat there, too tall to fit in the seat properly, folded wrong, knees bent at unnatural angles, elbows resting casually against the window as though the truck were meant to accommodate it. No face, just a smooth surface where features should be, turned fully in my direction. Staring without eyes. I jerked my gaze forward instantly, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The air inside the truck vibrated faintly with a low hum, like the thing behind me was exhaling in approval. Then it leaned forward. The seat frame groaned as the weight pressed closer. I felt a chill spread across the back of my neck. Not a touch, but proximity. Breath that didn't warm, pressure that didn't move air. Rule 9 screamed at me, "Do not turn." A slow, scraping sound drew across the roof of the truck, metal bending ever so slightly. Then a second scrape, this one moving down the windshield, though nothing visible pressed against the glass. The fog outside began to swirl in a wide circle, as though the air itself was being stirred by something massive moving unseen. I had to do something. If I sat here, if I hesitated another second, Ridgeview would finish whatever it had decided to start. I pushed the door open, stepping out with one fluid motion. The air outside was cold and heavy enough to make my lungs clamp. I shut the door behind me, soft, deliberate, and forced my feet to move toward the maintenance building. Every step felt like punching through water. Halfway to the door, the truck engine cut off. Not sputtered, not stalled. Stopped. Instantly, the headlights died. The interior light flickered once, just long enough to illuminate the back seat. Empty, but the indentation on the seat cushion, deep, long, still fresh, proved something had been there. The fog crept closer, forming low arcs around my ankles. The maintenance building door seemed impossibly far despite being only 10 yards away. Then the voice came again. Not from the radio. From the roof of the truck. A whisper dragged across metal, perfectly clear. You broke Rule 5. It knows now. I didn't look back. I didn't run. I walked as quickly as the rules allowed, maintaining a steady rhythm even as the ground seemed to breathe under my boots. The door to the maintenance building resisted when I turned the handle, sticking as though someone on the other side pressed against it. I leaned harder. The door gave way, opening into the dim interior. I stepped inside and shut it. The lights flickered overhead, humming weakly. The air felt different here, thicker but ordered, like the building itself still obeyed normal physics. For a moment, I thought I was safe. Then I saw the papers spread across the workbench. Dozens of them. My rules sheets. Not photocopies. Not rewrites. My original sheets, each one with a different version of Rule 5 filled in by a different hand. Some neat. Some frantic. Some smeared with dirt or water. One written in shaky block letters read, Rule 5. Do not exit your vehicle if it sits down with you. Another. Rule 5. Never leave the tower when it is waiting below. Another. Rule 5. Do not ignore any rule added after a storm. They contradicted each other completely. A trap. Every sheet was a trap. The fog pressed against the windows, thickening again. The whole building creaked as if bending inward, responding to something unseen outside. And then I heard the softest tap at the door behind me. Not 3 taps, just one. As if Rule 5 had finally made up its mind. The single tap at the door shouldn't have frozen me the way it did, but something about it felt decisive. Like the sound didn't come from knuckles or nails, but from intention. I stayed perfectly still, breath pulled tight inside my chest, waiting for another tap. None came. The silence after was so complete it felt unnatural, like the world outside the maintenance building had been muted. Rule 8 didn't cover one tap. One tap meant nothing in the official list. But that was the problem. Nothing meant nothing here. Everything meant something. I backed away from the door slowly, eyes locked on the doorknob. It didn't turn. No shadow pushed beneath the frame. No breath leaked through the cracks. The fog outside didn't smear across the glass. Just waited. My gaze drifted back to the workbench where the dozens of conflicting Rule 5 sheets lay fanned out like a morbid card spread. Some pages were crisp, others water-stained, a few burned at the corners. One had a reddish-brown smear that looked too old to be fresh blood but too dark to dismiss. Every caretaker before me had faced the same lie. Rule 5 wasn't something we forgot. It was something we were shown, something the cemetery forced into existence. I stepped closer to the papers, careful not to touch them. The writing on one sheet caught my eye. Not the words, but the indentation beneath the ink. Someone had pressed hard enough with their pen to scar the wood beneath. Rule 5. When it sits down with you, don't breathe. My throat tightened, earlier in the truck. When the breathing behind me shifted, when the weight changed, when the cold pressed the back of my neck, I had breathed. I remembered the sharp inhale of panic I tried to hide. If that version of the rule had been the correct one. No, I forced that thought down. Every rule on this table contradicted the others. If Ridgeview wanted to show me a specific Rule 5, it wouldn't scatter a dozen versions around like a deck of false answers. It wanted something else from me, someone else's mistake to repeat. Another tap, softer, closer, not at the door this time, at the window. I turned my head slowly. The fog had thickened outside, rolling across the glass like pale fingers dragging downward. But something darker stood behind it, an outline barely visible through the milky distortion. Tall, still, shoulders brushing the top of the window frame even though the exterior walkway was a few feet lower than the interior floor. It shouldn't have been able to stand that tall outside. The shape leaned closer. The fog thinned around where its head should have been. No face, just smoothness, like before. Except this time, the surface wasn't blank. Something was written across it. A single word, 5, drawn in thin white lines, like veins glowing beneath skin. I stumbled backward until my hip hit the corner of the workbench. Tools clattered but didn't fall. The figure stayed at the window, motionless except for the slow tilt of its head, as though reading my reaction. Then the word began to smear. Not drip, smear, as if something inside the face pressed against the surface, dragging the letters into long strokes. 5 became find, then fine, then a shape not made of letters at all, something twisting, curling, incomprehensible. The light in the building flickered once, twice, then steadied. The figure vanished, not stepped back, not dissolved, vanished like the fog simply forgot to contain it. I exhaled shakily and reached for the emergency kit tucked beneath the workbench. Not because first aid mattered, but because the kit was metal, heavy enough to use as a blunt weapon. Useless against most things here, but human fear makes you reach for familiar shapes. I gripped it anyway. The papers fluttered suddenly. All of them, as if a breeze blew through the room, though no window was open and no vent hummed. A single sheet lifted, hovered slightly above the table, then glided forward until it pressed against my chest. I didn't grab it, it simply stuck there like static held it in place. I looked down. Another Rule 5. Rule 5. Do not let it choose the rule for you. My stomach dropped. The fog outside thickened again, pushing itself into the window panes like a rising tide. The room dimmed. The lights flickered until only one remained, the bulb over the workbench. It buzzed faintly. Something scraped across the roof of the building. Not footsteps. A long, slow drag, like the underside of a massive limb pulling itself forward. The building groaned. Dust dropped from the rafters. Whatever had climbed the tower earlier, it was here now. The scrape moved toward the front door. Stopped. Moved toward the back exit. Stopped again. It was searching. Not for me. If it wanted me, walls wouldn't matter. It was searching for the rule. The correct version. The one I would choose or acknowledge. If I picked one, believed it, acted on it, it would become real, and Ridgeview would bind itself around that rule. Around me, a third scrape, this one directly overhead, vibrated the building so hard the fluorescent lights buzzed louder. My radio hissed. I didn't touch it. The hiss grew clearer, sharpening into words. A whisper, but not a child this time. An adult. A man. Broken voice like vocal cords scraped raw. Don't pick one, Elias. My blood ran cold. I knew that voice. I had heard it once. From the caretaker who trained me. The one who vanished my second week on the job. They found his truck at the far end of the cemetery. They never found him. The radio crackled louder. Don't choose Rule 5. That's how it binds you. That's how it keeps you. His breaths were shallow, wet, like he was speaking through blood. It will show you hundreds. Thousands. Everyone wrong. Everyone right. Don't take any. A heavy impact shook the wall beside me, rattling the tools. The voice gasped sharply. It hears me. Elias. Don't listen to. The radio cut off mid-syllable. The silence after was suffocating. The fog throbbed against the windows. The walls groaned inward, like the whole building inhaled deeply. Then, a knock. Not at the door. Behind me, inside the building. I turned slowly, heart clawing its way into my throat. Something was standing at the far wall. Not tall, not monstrous. A human silhouette, leaning slightly to one side, clothing dark with moisture. Head bowed. A man. A caretaker's uniform. My mentor. But his feet weren't touching the ground. He hovered inches above the floor, face bruised, eyes hollow. His mouth moved slowly, forming words that barely carried. You waited too long. Then his jaw shifted at a wrong angle. And behind him, something unfolded from the shadows. Not stepping out, unfolding, like it had been pressed flat against the wall until it chose to open. Long limbs, smooth face, letters blooming across it like cracks of light. Choose. The word glowing across its featureless face. Choose. Pulsed faintly, like light beneath thin skin. My mentor's body hung suspended beside it, limbs slack, head tilted unnaturally as if his spine had softened. His eyes, what remained of them, tracked toward me with a terrible, pleading awareness. Not alive, not gone, something in between. I stepped backward instinctively, bumping the metal workbench. Tools rattled, and the sound felt too loud in the thick air. The tall thing didn't move, but the letters across its face bled into a new shape, streaks stretching downward. Now, my mentor's jaw clicked open as though unhinged by invisible fingers. A thin, bubbling voice forced itself through his throat, every word wet. "It needs your Rule 5. His body jerked once, as if pulled by strings. His arm rose, or rather, it was lifted, his hand trembling violently as it extended toward the papers scattered across the bench. "Give it 1, he begged. But his voice wasn't begging. It was reciting, repeating, a script forced into his mouth. I shook my head. "No," I whispered without meaning to. The tall figure's head twitched sharply at the sound. Just a fraction of a movement, but enough to freeze every muscle in my body. Silence flooded the building again. Even my heartbeat felt dampened, muffled under layers of something heavy and unseen. The papers on the bench fluttered once, then began sliding across the wood toward the figure, as though drawn by static or magnetism. One sheet lifted into the air, hovering mid-space between me and the faceless thing. The words on it began to rearrange themselves. Ink moved like living veins, curling, twisting, rewriting. Letters broke apart, reassembled. I stared helplessly as a new Rule 5 took shape. Rule 5. Accept the rule you are shown. The moment the last letter formed, the tall figure tilted its head, waiting. Waiting for acknowledgement. Waiting for belief. Waiting for me to bind myself to the rule it had chosen. My mentor's suspended body jerked again, head snapping upright, mouth stretched wider. A sound forced out of him, something like a sob strangled into a laugh. "That's the right one," he croaked. "Say it, please." His voice broke apart, fragments of words tearing loose from each other. "Say it so we can." He didn't finish. A thin fissure cracked down the center of his forehead. Light seeped through it, white, cold, pulsing with an unnatural heartbeat. The tall figure stepped closer, its limbs moving with the slow confidence of something that has all the time in the world. I stumbled sideways, my back hitting the shelves along the wall. The emergency kit fell from my grip and landed with a metallic thud. The sound snapped something inside me, a reminder that physical things still obeyed real rules, not Ridgeview's twisted versions. I whispered, barely audible, "I never got this rule on my first day." The letters on the figure's face convulsed, like ink boiling under heat. Lines ripped apart, reforming into a single stark word. "No." My mentor dropped suddenly, his feet hitting the ground with a wet slap. He staggered forward, not walking but dragged by invisible hooks embedded in his joints. His arms flailed once in my direction, reaching, pleading, warning. His voice tore loose like fabric ripping. "You have to choose, before it chooses you." His chest caved inward so suddenly it sounded like a watermelon dropped onto concrete. Light burst from the cavity, blinding and cold, swirling upward to the tall figure's hand like smoke pulled into a vacuum. And the figure grew, not taller, denser, more defined. The fog pressed harder against the windows. The building groaned, wooden beams bending inward as if gravity had shifted toward the thing in front of me. Another paper slid across the table, its text rewriting itself violently, scratching letters into the page with invisible claws. Rule 5. If you refuse, IT will take the choice from you. Ink spattered across the page like blood. A low hum filled the room, vibrating the tools, vibrating my ribs, vibrating the fillings in my teeth. The tall figure's limbs extended outward slightly, almost welcoming, inviting. My pulse hammered. My mouth was dry. I took a step backward, only to feel the wall behind me. No escape. Only forward. Only the figure. Only the hovering sheet. For the first time all day, my thoughts sharpened. Not from fear, but clarity. Every rule on these pages contradicted the others. Every Rule 5 was different. Every Rule 5 was newly written. None existed before today, but the cemetery insisted one did. So what if the entire trap wasn't about choosing a rule, but about acknowledging that any Rule 5 ever existed at all? If I believed there was a Rule 5, Ridgeview would bind me to it, whichever version I accepted. So long as I accepted the premise. I never had a Rule 5, I said aloud, more firmly this time. There is no Rule 5. The tall figure did not like that. Its entire body recoiled. Not backward, but inward, collapsing slightly like a ripple through liquid. The letters across its face spasmed violently, losing shape, becoming wild streaks of white that burned against its dark surface. My mentor's collapsed body spasmed in sync, limbs twitching, light flickering through the cracks in his skin like faulty wiring. The hum in the room rose sharply, becoming a roar. The fog outside slammed against the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. The figure jerked toward me, one impossible stride that covered nearly half the room. Its limbs unfurled like unfolding ladders, reaching, grasping, reeling me into the gravity of its presence. Sheets of paper whipped into the air around us, spinning like birds scattering from a predator. All of them rewriting themselves desperately, violently, trying to form new Rule 5s faster than I could read them. The figure loomed inches from me now. The air around it pulled at my lungs, dragged at my breath, dragged at my thoughts. Letters coiled across its face, forming one last frantic command. Choose, I whispered. No. The lights exploded above me. A blast of pressure knocked the shelves backward, sending tools flying. The figure rippled, folding inward like collapsing fabric. My mentor's body shattered into a burst of white light that streaked into the ceiling beams. Then, silence. The figure was gone. The fog outside froze. The air returned. And on the workbench, only one piece of paper remained. Blank. Completely blank. The true Rule 5, whatever it was, hadn't been revealed. And Ridgeview had not forgiven that. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The only proof anything had happened was the sharp ringing in my ears and the blank sheet lying on the workbench, perfectly still despite the debris scattered around it. The fog outside remained motionless too, frozen against the windows like frost trapped mid-melt. I waited for something to shift, some ripple of the cemetery's attention. But nothing happened. That was somehow worse. When Ridgeview is loud, you know where not to step. Silence meant it was thinking, processing, changing the rules. I backed slowly away from the workbench, careful not to let my shoes scrape the floor too loudly. The emergency kit lay on its side near the shelves. I picked it up again, gripping the handle tighter than before. A flimsy security blanket, but it helped my hands stop shaking. My mentor's body, or what had been left of it, was gone. No blood, no fragments, no scorch marks, as if the man had been erased rather than destroyed. I'd always assumed his disappearance was a tragic accident, an encounter with something in the fog he couldn't escape. But now, after what I'd seen, something colder settled over me. He hadn't disappeared. He'd been kept. The lights flickered again, once, twice, then steadied. A low vibration hummed through the building floorboards, subtle but present, like a large engine idling beneath the ground. I opened the door a crack. Fog pressed against it, resisting slightly like a heavy curtain. But it didn't surge inward. It didn't crawl across the threshold. It simply hung there, neither entering nor retreating, almost like it was waiting for permission. I stepped outside. The moment my boot touched the gravel, the fog shifted. Not explosively, just repositioning, sliding around me in a wide circle, forming a loose perimeter, as if marking territory around me, or isolating me from something else. The maintenance building creaked behind me. I turned back to look at it and froze. Every window was now covered in handwriting. Black marker, smeared in places but unmistakable. Looping cursive, jagged print, frantic scratches. Dozens of versions of 5 words repeated over and over. Where is Rule 5? Some lines were written in a careful, almost gentle hand. Others tore across the glass in desperate, uneven strokes. The phrases overlapped until the entire building looked wrapped in layered pleas from caretakers long before me. The fog tightened around me, not close enough to touch, but enough that I could feel the temperature shift, warmer now, pulsing faintly like breath. I started walking toward the truck, keeping my steps measured. The gravel crunched softly beneath my boots. Halfway there, I noticed something off. The tire tracks leading to the maintenance lot were gone. Totally wiped away. Clean gravel, no indentations. As if the truck had simply appeared there instead of being driven. Or as if Ridgeview didn't want evidence of where I'd come from. I reached the driver's side door and hesitated. The metal felt colder than air, almost painfully so. I opened it slowly. The indentation on the back seat. The deep, stretched depression from where that thing had sat was gone. The seat looked perfect. Too perfect. As if it had never been touched. But a single piece of paper lay on the cushion. Different from the others. Older. Yellowed at the edges. Torn from a spiral notebook. I picked it up with 2 fingers, careful not to brush more surface than necessary. There was no heading. Just a sentence in shaky handwriting. Rule 5 is never written. If you see it, you're already inside it. My mouth dried instantly. The cemetery wasn't tricking me into choosing a rule. It was making me live one. A rule not printed on any sheet. A rule not said aloud. A rule not taught. A rule that existed only when Ridgeview wanted it to. And whatever had unfolded in the maintenance building, that had been Rule 5. I folded the paper once and stuffed it into my pocket, resisting the urge to tear it apart. Destroying it wouldn't erase what had happened. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door gently. When I turned the key, the engine didn't struggle. It started instantly. Too instantly. Like it had been waiting. The radio clicked on even though I hadn't touched it. A soft static. Then a voice. Not a child. Not my mentor. My own voice. Get out of the truck. I stared at the radio, throat tightening. The voice repeated, a little firmer. Elias, get out of the truck. I didn't move. The fog outside pressed closer to the windows, forming swirling patterns like fingerprints smearing across glass. My voice came again. Rule 5 begins in vehicles. That's why you felt it first. Get out. Now. I clenched the wheel. No. You're not me. The radio crackled sharply, as if offended. Then my voice dropped lower. Quieter. Closer. I'm not talking to you. A chill crawled up my back. Then the back door lock clicked. Once. Slowly. My breath hitched. I turned my eyes, just my eyes, to the rearview mirror. At first, I didn't see anything. Just fog-smeared glass. Then movement. Not something entering the truck. Something already in it. A weight shifted behind the passenger seat. The upholstery tightened as though stretched by invisible pressure. The air temperature dropped 10 degrees, cold enough that frost formed in a thin lace across the edges of the window. The radio whispered, "It's awake." The pressure behind me increased. A subtle indentation formed on the seat, deepening slowly, as if something were settling into a shape it had once worn. A breath, slow, heavy, rolled across the back of my neck, not from outside, not from the radio, inside the truck. Directly behind me, I gripped the door handle, then stopped. Rule 9 hammered in my mind. Do not turn. Do not look. But staying meant letting it settle fully, letting it define the space around me. My voice on the radio whispered one more thing. Just don't breathe. My lungs seized. Panic flared so violently I nearly choked on instinct. If this was another false Rule 5, then breathing or not breathing wouldn't matter. But silence might. Stillness might. Ridgeview was watching closely now. So I did the only thing left to do. I held my breath, and something behind me leaned in close enough for the cold to bite my skin. Holding my breath made the world sharpen in a way I wasn't prepared for. Every heartbeat a blunt thud under my ribs. Every muscle trembling with the effort not to inhale. The air inside the truck pressed close, dense, too cold. I felt not heard, something shift directly behind me. Not a full movement, just a subtle tightening of space, like the air rearranged itself to accommodate a shape that had been missing only moments before. My fingers locked around the door handle. If I moved too fast, it would track the motion. If I exhaled, it would hear the sound. If I looked, I would acknowledge it. And Rule 9, real or not, felt like the last rope between me and the thing filling the truck. The radio crackled sharply. A burst of static. Then silence. Then my voice again, barely audible, as if whispered from inside the speaker's wiring. Not yet. The seat behind me creaked. Slowly, deliberately, like something was shifting its weight toward me, not to attack but to investigate, to confirm, to rewrite. A cold pressure moved toward the left side of my neck, hovering just above the skin. Not touching, just sensing. The way a person holds their palm over a campfire to test the heat. The thing in the truck was testing whether I was still breathing. My chest burned. My lungs clawed for air, desperate, begging me to inhale, but I didn't. I held on. Seconds felt like minutes. My vision prickled at the edges, tunneling. Then something happened. The truck exhaled. A low, deep sound rolled through the cab, like a sigh forced through a hollow cavity. The cold behind me receded slightly, not gone, but pulled back, as if the figure had leaned away, satisfied for the moment. My hand tightened around the door handle until my knuckles popped softly. The figure shifted again, this time farther back, a weight releasing from the seat. The air grew marginally warmer. Felt like the thing was standing, unfolding, preparing to leave the vehicle, or preparing for me to leave it first. Fog outside swelled against the windows, thickening until the world beyond the truck looked underwater. Shapes moved within it, tall, thin, unsteady distortions sliding past like shadows cut loose from bodies. I felt the figure behind me lean away entirely. A gap opened, an absence where a presence had been. Still holding my breath, I pressed down on the door handle, as quietly as possible. The latch clicked with a soft mechanical snap. Too loud. Everything froze. My heart hammered so violently my vision pulsed with every beat. The fog outside shifted toward the sound. The figure behind me didn't move, but its awareness returned, pressing against the back of my skull like a palm made of cold air. I forced my hand to keep moving. Slow, steady. If I hesitated, Ridgeview would close in. The door cracked open. Fog slid inside immediately, thin strands at first, then thicker, curling like smoke with intent. It didn't rush me. It didn't attack. It simply entered, as if it belonged in the space as much as air or light. The figure leaned closer again. It wanted to see what I would do next. I pushed the door open wider, inch by inch, until the fog swallowed half of the cab. The cold outside wasn't a temperature anymore. It was a presence, a waiting. My lungs screamed. I stepped out. The truck shifted slightly as though relieved of a passenger who had never belonged. I shut the door without turning around, careful, slow, as if sealing something inside that couldn't be allowed to follow. The instant the latch clicked, a shudder ran through the vehicle. Not violent, not angry, just a settling motion. Something inside had sat back down. The fog tightened around me like a noose, not touching, but close enough that I could feel pressure on all sides. The world beyond it was silent. So silent the hum of blood in my ears felt like a siren. I stumbled backward, dizzy from lack of air, until my foot hit gravel. I dropped to one knee and inhaled. Cold flooded my chest so sharply I coughed hard enough to taste iron. The fog reacted immediately, contracting fast, like it inhaled with me. But nothing struck. Nothing grabbed me. Nothing dragged me back. The fog simply observed, like the cemetery was recalibrating something, recalculating me. My breath steadied after several painful seconds. The truck remained motionless. The indentation on the back seat didn't return. The radio stayed silent. I rose slowly. The fog thinned, parting slightly to reveal the path back toward the main grounds. I didn't want to follow it. Every instinct told me to run into the woods, leave Ridgeview behind, never look at another grave so long as I lived. But the cemetery had opened a path, and Ridgeview only opens paths in one direction, where it wants you. I walked. The fog shifted with every step, staying just far enough away to give the illusion of distance. The air grew warmer, then colder, then warm again, as if the cemetery was cycling through seasons searching for the temperature that frightened me most. Eventually, the fog parted completely. I stood in front of the oldest part of the cemetery, the original section, dating back 150 years. The stones were crooked, half swallowed by earth, names eroded into ghost scratches. The place caretakers avoid unless absolutely necessary. A single grave sat ahead of me, freshly dug, so knew the dirt was still damp. My breath choked in my throat. A headstone stood at its head, plain granite, my name carved into it. ELIASWARD. Below it, a single line. Rule 5. You are what it makes you. The world lurched sideways. Anger, fear, denial, all folding into a single crushing pressure in my chest. My breath fogged the cold air. The fog around me rose in spirals, closing in with deliberate calm. This wasn't a threat. This was a declaration, a boundary, a verdict. I stepped backward. The ground behind me shifted, softening, sinking slightly, as if inviting me down, inviting me in. I whispered, barely audible, "I'm not dead. I'm not yours." The fog coiled tighter. The fresh grave exhaled. A voice, my voice, rose from the soil. "You held your breath too long." I staggered backward, but the fog surged, catching my legs, pulling me toward the open earth. Not violently, no claws, no hands, just pressure. Gravity rewritten. Rule 5 wasn't something written. Rule 5 wasn't something chosen. Rule 5 wasn't something disobeyed. Rule 5 was a transformation. Something Ridgeview decided you were. And Ridgeview had decided. I clawed at the earth, at the grass, at anything. But the world leaned forward, tilting, folding, lowering me toward the dark soil. My own voice whispered again from beneath. "Welcome, caretaker." Fog filled my mouth. Soil pressed my ribs. The cemetery closed its arms. And Ridgeview finally took back what it believed had always belonged to it.